Stay tuned, stay tuned, stay tuned. I'm here with the coach, John Brandt.
And I'm here with the vet, Mr. N. Griffin.
What's going on, man?
Man, just starting to get hot again. We had a rain like crazy last night. I didn't think it was ever going to stop raining. And then it's hot and humid today.
It is very hot and humid. So today, it is very humid out there. I went out there and heard all the rain come down. Pretty good. We needed that. But today we're going to start a two-part series that we want to do, and they'll both air on Monday. One will air tomorrow, and the other one will air the following Monday, and they'll be on the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right.
And of course Tuesday we'll do our live. So yeah, I think it'll be good
about this because I have studied for 2 decades on the assassination of JFK, and in doing that, if you ever get involved in the assassination of JFK and you think it's more than just Lee Harvey Oswald, then you're going to always get into the Cuban part of it, because at that time we were actually training anti-Castro Cubans to possibly kill Fidel Castro. A lot of people believe that they got switched around back on us and Kennedy, but yeah, this is great. I love this.
Yeah, so there's a whole lot of parts to this, and I did some studying. I'm not as familiar with this. I'm a World War II guy. I'm a Civil War guy, and I'm a Russian history guy up to about the end of World War II. So anyway, so that's kind of the guy I am. But I did some parts studying on it. And, we commented several times, Coach, on the last Democratic president that really understood foreign policy was JFK. But although with the Bay of Pigs, he stumbled. I mean, he stumbled hard. And when I read about the Bay of Pigs, prepping up to this, the fact that they did the invasion, then he pulled the air support away. I'm like, what the flip-flop, man? Why would you do that? But yeah, that's the Democratic Party. I hate to say that. Anybody throw darts at me all you want, but tell me one since JFK, since then, besides JFK, have they not blundered foreign policy whatsoever? I mean, so that's my thoughts on it.
Just a little bit back to Bay of Pigs, just before we get started on this. The reason that was such a big deal was he had promised air support prior to. If you get the people together, get them there, we'll support you. And at the last minute, he refused to do so because of politics, and it cost hundreds of lives. But what it did more than that, it put the anti-Castro Cubans that were on our side never trusting the Kennedy administration again.
It did that, and also with Khrushchev, who we're going to talk about, felt that Kennedy was young. He was super smart, intelligent, but smart in political ways, but had no backbone, would never stand by anything, because he wouldn't even stand by putting the Air Force there or air support, So that's interesting. So we're going to start off with, when we look at the theater, and what I read in this here about the Cuban Missile Crisis is we really had the Russians at a dire advantage at that point in history right then. And it really put them on their heels, where they had to try to level the playing field. And because the playing field was not level, a lot of people don't realize this. There was a lot of propaganda about they had thousands of missiles that could reach us, and they didn't. They had four. And we had submarine launch missiles with the capability of getting there, and they did not. And then we also had missiles in Turkey and in Italy that was right outside their front doorstep. And so we kind of had an advantage in a lot of ways, and they were trying to equal the playing field. So I'm going to let you start it off, Coach. Go ahead.
Well, to start with the Cuban Missile Crisis, you actually have to start back with Fidel Castro coming into power. Prior to that, we had dictator Batista that was running the country, and he really didn't have too much of an alliance at all with the Soviet Union. And people have to realize, yes, the Soviet Union was on our side in World War II to stop, Germany and Japan and Italy. But what came after that was they became a superpower themselves, and they wanted to spread communism just like we wanted to spread democracy. So when Cuba, Fidel Castro and the Argentine revolutionary hero, as people call him, depends on which side you look at, Che Guevara, decided they were going to overthrow Batista and take over Cuba, that was a huge thing. And we actually supported that. The United States did, not knowing that just not even one full year after the invasion that Cuba would officially align themselves with the Soviet Union and their policies, meaning communism. So that was a huge thing to start that. One thing that I will have to say when I study the history of the Cuban Missile Crisis and us now thinking of it, Fidel Castro had a mouth kind of like the North Korea dictator does now. He would always threaten, you touch this or it's an all-out war. Don't do this or we're going to bomb you. And, you know, I think sometimes the North Korean leader's father that passed away first, I think he got his playbook pretty much from Fidel Castro, how to deal with us, because it put us back on our feet because we don't want an all-out war. So coming up to the Cuban Missile Crisis, John McCone, and I'm going to stop after this, John McCone was the CIA director at that time. And he came to President Kennedy and said, hey, the Soviets have medium-range ballistic missiles, and I think they're soon going to be deployed from Cuba. That's what we're hearing. Mm-hmm. And at that point in time, no one really believed it because they didn't think they're going to have the balls to actually do that. And so that's kind of where this whole thing starts, Ben.
So speaking of Kim Il-jong, I messed his name up, but I was there when he was in charge. And one of the biggest fears was him dying because he said, I will be buried in Seoul. And we're like, he dies, they're going to Seoul, you know, and Seoul is only a 3-minute away airstrike. And the saying we used to say, and I was stationed in downtown Seoul, and the saying we used to say there is, they'll strike the heck out of us. They'll get that one strike off, but they'll never land them airplanes anywhere else again because those airfields will be destroyed. But anyway, back to the Cuba thing. I read in there that when they aligned with Russia, that Fidel Castro didn't want that because he did not want to be perceived. And it's kind of ironic that he had the foresight to understand this, but he was absolutely perceived this way, is what he thought. He didn't want to be perceived as a puppet of Russia. And that's exactly what the West thought about. And the other thing I'll say is we had the little thing called the Monroe Doctrine, where anything in the Western Hemisphere belonged to the United States of America as far as influence, and European powers should stay out. Although, how audacious is that? While we're parking nuclear missiles in Turkey, you know, that's kind of pretty audacious to say. But when you're the only superpower of the world at the time, you can say those things. But Americans need to have a dose of, we were kind of overboard with that expectation, to be quite honest, sure. You know. So I'll say that. And as we go into this, I just looked at a lot of like the aircraft and the missiles at the time, the ranges, and really what a lot of people might not understand is really the ability to strike and close a target from far away at a closer range didn't really develop till another 5 years from now, from this point in history. And that's when we really were able to, both sides really were able to harness it down to like, okay, we'll get it within a quarter of a mile, or we'll get it right there, you know. So that wasn't the technology then. So this definitely put America on a big scare. And I think the other aspect of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I'll throw it back over to you, is this happened, go figure, when? During election season. Oh
yeah. I mean, you can't downplay that. One of the things that, you know, in the summer of '62, the election was going to be, you know, Kennedy was going to, you know, start pushing for that again. In 1962, you know, just like they do, they started a year and a half, 2 years prior. But August of '62 is when McCone said that, tried to inform Kennedy that, hey, the Soviets are doing something. And not even a month later, actually might have been right at about a month later, in a speech to the United Nations, their foreign minister, Andrei Gromyko, said those words: if the U.S. attack on Cuba, it's going to be war with us at the Soviet Union. So that was the month before we saw the photographic evidence for the first time in October of '62. So August, September, and October, man, it increased in the seriousness of the situation pretty quick, because we said, hey, we think they're there, President Kennedy. And then the Soviets say, you know, if you ever attack Cuba, it's a war on us. And then 1 month later, they walk into the White House and say, we have photographic evidence that there are missiles now in Western Cuba. I mean, come on, man, that had to be a heart-dropping moment for Kennedy, because we'd never been put in that situation, because after the atomic bomb that we dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, everything had increased in intensity, because the Soviet Union and us were already going that way, where there were so much nuclear weapons that we were putting in certain places. But to have one 90 miles from Florida was not what Kennedy wanted to hear.
Yeah, so I'll say this is, up to this point, we didn't have this term that is prevalent now. Well, it's not a term, it's a phrase, but mutually assured destruction after the Cuban Missile Crisis. And that's what Soviet Union wanted, was they either wanted us to pull some missiles out of Turkey because of this, or they wanted a venue that they could say, if you attack us, we'll destroy your butts just as well as you'll destroy our butts. That wasn't there prior to this because, like I said, even though Khrushchev came out and he said, we have enough missiles to we make as many missiles as you make sausages, is what he kind of said, or something like that, trying to say they make them all the time. No, they only had 4. They had 4 that had the capability of 2,500 miles, and they were wanting to park some of them over in Cuba because they didn't have anything that could reach us at the time, our main continent. And where it was estimated we had over 170 that had the capability with the George Washington class submarines and the Ethan Allen class submarines. They each held 16 Polaris missiles that we could reach Moscow easily, and not with. And what they said at the time with the sea launch missiles, the SBLMs, there was no counter to that because the submarine was moving. It launched while it moves. There was no counter to it at the time, technology-wise. And so we had a huge advantage in this. And then one of the things that was unique about our missiles, too, because they were smaller, is our missiles had hydrogen bombs on them to conserve the space. And because of being on the submarine itself. So it was a major play. And when you look at this, if you think about what became the outcome of it, Khrushchev, many people thought he played his cards wrong, but I don't know. He might have played his cards pretty good because he got missiles removed at the end of the day close to his territory. So
yeah, we'll get into that later, but I will tell you this much. There's a book that I think anyone that has any interest in this, including yourself, that needs to read. Robert Kennedy actually published a book called 13 Days about 13 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it kind of gets the behind the scenes of what was going on. And there were terror. I mean, they were terrified at the time because right when the 14th happened, where there's the evidence came in, just 2 days later, the Kennedy and his national security advisor had this huge meeting to discuss not only diplomatic courses, but also military courses of what we might have to do. Because we didn't, at that point in time, we didn't know if it was going to be a defensive measure just for, Cuba, as just a couple of days later, Gromyko told us that it was just for defense. But we didn't know if it was an offensive move by the Soviet Union. We had no clue at that time. So on the 18th of October, I do know this, Gromyko meets with Kennedy himself and assures him that the Soviet weapons were given to Cuba only for defense of Cuba. Well, when he left that meeting, when you read 13 Days, Kennedy did not believe him. Robert Kennedy literally said that his brother didn't believe him. So just a day later, a day and a half later, on the 20th, that's when Kennedy came on TV and announced to the nation the presence of the offensive missile sites in Cuba. And at that point, the world was the closest it's ever been to nuclear war. So I don't think we go too much further than that on this first segment, but you have to realize he told the nation, not behind the scenes, not trying to hide or not trying to protect for politics. He actually came out and said, there's a presence of offensive missile sites in Cuba, which at that point in time, he actually thought that they were going to launch those missiles at us because the behind channels that were going on was not going good with him and Khrushchev.
Yeah. So from the intelligence perspective, from what I understand, they were worried. Originally they thought they were led to believe by the Soviets that they were only there for defensive purposes.
Correct.
Okay. So, but they received intelligence from local communities that the trucks that were coming through towns had to back up and renegotiate and maneuver. And the defensive missiles, they could just drive through. They knew that. And that was one of the leading indicators before they sent the U-2 plane. We'll cover that, also the U-2 plane. But one of the things that I read about this is there were several things that the Soviets wanted to incur with this. Is one, they wanted to create this mutual assured destruction path, so that way they felt comfortable nobody would attack them because they knew the other side knew that they would destroy them completely. That was one. and they would feel comfortable with them, more comfortable if anything was ever around Turkey again. The second thing was the Berlin crisis. Is it happened a while back, but Khrushchev still wanted West Berlin, and he thought he might be able to nudge West Berlin out of this. And I was like, wow, I didn't realize that. But that's what he was hoping, was to get them to worry about Cuba, have to do a deal. The president is immature. He's young. He doesn't know what he's doing. That was Khrushchev's words, is he don't know what he's doing. He's naive. He's never played the world stage. He won't stick to anything. He'll bring it up. And then the third thing was what better feather in their hat is to, whatever happens, if they just get Cuba to be against America, they're happy as heck anyhow.
Right. You know? Yeah. I mean, at that point in time, even if the minimum thing that happens is we have someone 90 miles from the tip of that can, someone that we have to worry about and watch and protect and keep our intelligence on. That's less intelligence that can be over, against Russia or even in Europe at that time. I do know this much, that one of the things that happened was just two or 3 days after Kennedy's televised, to the television report to the nation, he ordered U.S. ships to take a position around 800 or so miles from Cuba and form a quarantine line. And that was just pretty much saying, hey, this. You're not coming and going anymore. This is our area. And Khrushchev was furious. And then Khrushchev, if I remember correctly, on the same afternoon when he heard that, he said, I will refuse to remove any missiles, saying that the world will not be intimidated by the United States. Mm-hmm. He put every bit of the blame on the crisis on Kennedy. Which, yes. Yeah, here they are, but it's your fault.
Yeah, and the quarantine line is important because he could not use the term blockade, because that's an act of war during the time with international treaties. And so he had to resort to the term quarantine that way it wouldn't be an act of war, is what I saw on this. Now, another thing that was interesting is Russia sent 41,000 troops over there. Okay. But when they did, it was so secretive that they told them they were going in cold weather environment. They issued cold weather parkas, they issued cold weather boots and all this other stuff. And here you are going to sunny Cuba. I'm like, right. As a troop, I don't know if I'd be pissed off because I didn't prepare my suntan lotion or what,
Well, I always thought the reason for that was a lot of people don't realize, man, that time in the 50s and the 60s, late 50s, early 60s was straight up spy games all the time.
Oh, yeah.
We were infiltrating them. They were infiltrating us. So you would tell even your own troops and your own platoon and your own leaders, hey, we're going to do this, get on this ship. And only a few people know that, no, we're not going here, we're going there. Because intelligence was so crazy at that time that, it was just cloak and dagger back and forth, who's on what side. It was like a crazy game going on. So we're getting close to the end of this segment, but that's one of the things people have to realize is at that point in time that was going on, it was straight up spy games. And if it had been 50 years later, the amount of movies that could be about this stuff, man, they should be more movies about this. This is true spy games, Bet.
Yeah, you wonder where Ian Fleming got all his James Bond thoughts from. The 50s and 60s definitely had to be it. And in his time in the service too. But so one thing I do need to cover though, before we get ready to move on forward, is there was some discord in the United States military as a whole because we were using submarines to launch those missiles. And there's discord between the United States Navy. Are we the nuclear deterrent, or is the Air Force? And actually, we wanted to use both phases of it. But it also caused the United Kingdom with those submarines to make their nuclear deterrent to be the submarine, the Royal Navy as well, initially. And anybody knows anything about strategy, you got to use multiple pieces. You can't just use one. One solution has the enemy focused in on that, and they're going to counter it. So anyway, yes, I think we got about 2 minutes we can talk about this, and then we got to move on, get ready to move on to hit a break, Coach.
Yeah, I just think some of the things that people don't really realize, I'll say this real quick before we go further. This situation is going on right now. It was terrifying. I asked my father about it one time. I said, Dad, what was it like being alive at that time? Because he was like a middle school guy at this time, almost in the hospital. He said, there were nights that we literally at home and our parents and I were telling each other good night, not knowing if we would wake up in the morning. That's how intense it was. There was a few days that the world and the country had no idea if it was going to be just destruction. And I think sometimes we forget because we look back on it in the history book how actually close we were to having an all-out nuclear war. It's probably the closest time in history we ever had, for sure.
Yeah, I will say when you look at it, it's only a matter of a few days, and you kind of avoid it because you don't see a whole lot of troop turnover. You don't see a lot of deaths, and you just think it's a blimp. That was a huge time. But I will say there was a guy, and I can't remember his name. He wrote about this. He said, "Me say that we were as close as we ever to nuclear war." He said, "But the Russians were not going to do a dang thing." He said they were so nervous. He said they froze all kinds of communication at one point, even. But I will say this. I remember as a kid, my dad telling me about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and this was his words. He might not remember it or not, but this was his words. "Well, son, if we'd have done the damn bad pigs right, that dang president would have done that right, we would never had a Cuban Missile Crisis."
Exactly. We would look weak.
Yep. Yep. So I say this is the lead into the Cuban Missile Crisis. We're going to give you another one next Monday, and we just wanted to lay the groundwork. And so from that, I'm going to say from the coach
and to the vet.
stay tuned, stay tuned, stay tuned. Oh my goodness.